Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this wonderful, rich tradition we call Torah and in this wonderful, rich community of readers and interpreters and contributors to that wonderful, rich heritage that we have created over this time together. We are in Parshat Bo, which is in the book of Exodus, beginning with chapter 10, verse 1. We'll read through the English translation of our weekly portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll have our collective conversation about it. If you want to, feel free to unmute at this time, and together we can recite a blessing, giving thanks for sharing in this moment together. Baruch atah
Ata
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
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 kidshanu
Kishanu
kishanu
b'mitzvotav
Mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
Vitzivanu
la'asot
Lasso
v'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Amen.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Once again, Book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 1. Then God said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your children and of your children's children how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am Adonai." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. Richard, would you like to continue there at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall this one be a snare to us? Let the men go to worship the Lord their God. And are you not yet aware that Egypt is lost?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go, worship the Lord your God." "Who are the ones to go?" Moses replied. "We will all go, young and old. We will go with our sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, for we must observe the Lord's festival." But he said to them, "The Lord be with you, the same as I mean to let your children go with you. Clearly, you are bent on mischief. No, you menfolk go and worship the Lord, since that is what you want." And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence.
Thank you, Richard. Sherry, would you like to continue at verse 12?
Thank you. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left." So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord drove an east wind over the land all that day and all that night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. The locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened, and they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left, so that nothing green was left of tree or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I stand guilty before the Lord your God and before you. Forgive my offense just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he but remove this death from me. Want to pick up, Steve? Number 18.
So he left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. The Lord caused a shift to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the sea of reeds. Not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arms toward the sky. There may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days, no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwelling.
Thank you. And June, would you like to continue there at verse 24?
Thanks, Rabbi. Pharaoh then summoned Moses and said, go worship the Lord. Only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind. Even your children may go with you. But Moses said, you yourself must provide us with sacrifices and burnt offerings to offer up to the Lord our God. Our own livestock too shall go along with us. Not a hoof shall remain behind. For we must select from it for the worship of the Lord our God, and we shall not know with what we are to worship the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not agree to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, begone from me, take care not to see me again, for the moment you look upon my face, you shall die. And Moses replied, you have spoken rightly, I shall not see your face again.
Thank you, June. And Mark, would you like to continue at the very start of chapter 11?
I would, thank you. God said to Moses, I will send one more plague upon Pharaoh in Egypt. After that, he will send you forth from this place. And when he sends you forth, he will drive you all out of here. Please speak to the people and let them ask to borrow, each man from his friend and every woman from her friend, items of silver and gold. God made the Egyptians regard the people favorably. Moreover, by this time, Moses himself was highly esteemed in Egypt, both by Pharaoh's courtiers and by the people. Moses said to Pharaoh, this is what God has said. Exactly at midnight, I will go forth in the midst of Egypt. Every firstborn in Egypt will die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne to the firstborn of the maidservant behind the millstones, as well as every firstborn animal. There will be a great outcry throughout all Egypt, such as never has been and never will be again. But among the Israelites, no dog will whet its tongue against any person or any beast, in order that you may know that God is differentiating between the Egyptians and the Israelites. All these courtiers of yours will then come down and prostrate themselves before me and say, leave, you and all the people who follow your counsel. After that, I will leave with all my people. He left Pharaoh's presence indignantly. God then said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you in order that my marvels may be multiplied in Egypt. Moses and Aaron had performed all these marvels before Pharaoh, but God made Pharaoh stubborn, so he did not send forth the Israelites from his land.
Thank you. And David and Susan, would you like to continue there at the start of chapter 12?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
And Adonai said to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month is the beginning of months for you. It is first of the months of the year for you. Speak to all of the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, let them each take a lamb for the father's houses, a lamb per house. And if the household will be too few for a lamb, then he and his neighbor who is close and to his house will take it according to the count of persons. You shall count each person according to what he eats for the lamb.
You shall have an unblemished male year-old lamb. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats. And it shall be for you to watch over until the 14th day of the month. And all the community of the congregation of Israel will slaughter it between the 2 evenings. And they will take some of the blood and place it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they will eat it. And they will eat the meat in this night. They will eat it fire roasted and with unleavened bread on bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in water, but fire roasted, its head with its legs, with its innards. And do not leave any of it until morning. You shall burn what is left of it until morning in fire.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jim, would you like to continue there at verse 11?
Thank you, Rabbi. This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to Adonai. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, Adonai, and the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you. And when I strike the land of Egypt, this day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to Adonai. Throughout the ages, you shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel.
Thank you, Jim. And Robert, would you like to continue there at verse 16?
Yes, thank you. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and in the 7th day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No matter of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread, until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, Draw out and take you a lamb according to your families, and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass when ye come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. And the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So did they.
Thank you so much. And then, Norm, would you like to continue there at verse 29?
Thank you. Love to. In the middle of the night, Adonai struck down all the male firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive, who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go worship Adonai as you said. Take your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone. And may you bring a blessing upon me also. The Egyptians urged the people on, impatient to have them leave the country, for they said, We shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing. And Adonai had disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 fighting men on foot, aside from non-combatants. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with them, very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened breads for their dough, and they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had not been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430th year, to the very day, all the ranks of Adonai departed from the land of Egypt. That was for Adonai a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is Adonai's, one a vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, This is the law of Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat it. But any householder's purchased male slave may eat of it once he has been circumcised. Nor bound or hired laborer shall eat it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside of the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a male stranger who dwells with you should offer the Passover to Adonai, all his males must be circumcised. Then he shall be admitted to offer it. He shall then be as a citizen of the country, but no uncircumcised man may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. And all the Israelites did so as Adonai had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. That very day, Adonai freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop.
Thank you. And Justin and Linda, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 13?
Thank you, Rabbi. Sure. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Sanctify to me every firstborn, every one that opens the womb among the children of Israel, among man and among animals. It is mine." And Moses said to the people, "Remember this day when you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For with a mighty hand the Lord took you out of here, and therefore no leaven shall be eaten. Today you're going out in the month of spring, and it will come to pass that the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your forefathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. And you shall perform this service in this month. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened cakes, and on the seventh day there is a festival for the Lord. Unleavened cakes shall be eaten during the 7 days, and no leaven shall be seen of yours in your possession, and no leavening shall be seen of yours throughout all of your borders.
And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, because of this, the Lord did this for me when I went out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign upon your hand and as a remembrance between your eyes, in order that the law of the Lord shall be in your mouth. For with a mighty hand the Lord took you out of Egypt. And you shall keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. And it will come to pass when the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your forefathers, and he has given it to you, that you shall give over to the Lord whatever opens the womb, and every miscarriage that opens the womb of an animal, which will be yours. The males belong to the Lord. And every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you do not redeem it, you shall decapitate it. And every firstborn man among your sons you shall redeem. And it will come to pass, if your son asks you in the future, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, with a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was too stubborn to let us out, the Lord slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I slaughter for a sacrifice all males that opened the womb, and every firstborn of my sons I will redeem. And it shall be for a sign upon your hand, and for ornaments between your eyes. For with a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, very much. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And the word that gives us the title for this week's portion, bo, is the word that has really intrigued commentators throughout the centuries. And in part, it's because the word bo, which in my edition, and perhaps yours as well, is translated as go, as in go to Pharaoh. But as commentators point out, the Hebrew word bo is really the verb to come. And so there's a lot of provocation there about, well, why is the word come being there, and why is it often mistranslated as go? So the commentary that I'm sharing with you on the study sheet this year is from the Zohar, which is the central mystical text within Judaism, and it's probably the third most important sacred text that we have in Judaism after the Bible and after the Talmud. And this is what the Zohar says about this verse.
The commentary, is it back?
Why does it
Oh,
say,
No,
come to Pharaoh,
oh, the
go, El Pharaoh?
I thought it was.
It should have said, go to Pharaoh, which would have been more like, lech, El Pharaoh. God brought Moses into a chamber within a chamber to the supernal and mighty serpent from which many levels evolve, which Moses feared to approach himself. When the Blessed Holy One saw that Moses was afraid, the Blessed Holy One waged war against Pharaoh. So Zohar is pointing out that a literal reading of the Hebrew is not to go forth to Pharaoh, that is, go over there, but rather to come here to Pharaoh. And the language that the Zohar is using here is evocative of the sense that what the verse is describing on a spiritual level is that Moses is to come into something, and that something into which Moses is to come is the very essence, if you will, the spiritual essence of what Pharaoh represents. Uh, that sense of domination, that sense of overriding ego, that sense of an overbearing materialism, and the description of Pharaoh as a mighty serpent is one that appears in other areas of Jewish text. So, for example, in number 2, I have here from the prophet Ezekiel, thus said the eternal God, I am going to deal with you, O Pharaoh, king of Egypt, mighty sea serpent, sprawling in your streams, who said, my Nile is my own. I made it for myself. So in Ezekiel, uh, this spirit, this power, this force in the world that is called Pharaoh is once again represented as this sea serpent who has imagined that the Nile, the source of life there in that part of the world, is something that this power, whether you call it Pharaoh, the sea serpent, the dominating kind of overbearing ego that's represented by an empire, that this is a force that has presumed that what has been created in the world is something that this force created and it was for itself. So this is the unbridled ego seeking to impose its will on all of creation, and that the world exists only for to satisfy its own needs and its own desires. So this is in a sense, this is the force in the world that the Zohar is understanding God is now calling Moses to confront. And it is a confrontation not just with a force that exists outside of Moses, but it is understood to be a confrontation of Moses having with that force that exists within himself. And so this is much part of a much bigger kind of way of understanding our text, which is this is not just a confrontation with external oppressive powers, that this is part of a journey from enslavement to freedom. And on a spiritual level, in order to embark upon that journey, in order to truly arrive at the land of promise where one will have peace and settlement and fulfillment, it is necessary to confront and expunge from oneself those forces which are represented by Pharaoh, by Egypt, by the devouring serpent. That is, that overbearing power of the ego and of materialism and the oppression of others and of the transactional use of others for one's own satisfaction. So to confront that is a preliminary stage in order to go on in a successful way this journey from being constrained and narrow and entrapped and enslaved on this journey of freedom. So this coming into oneself in order to have that kind of confrontation, in order to eventually go forth, provoked me to think about some artists, and the artist that I thought of for our session this week is Jean Dubuffet, who was a French artist in the middle of the 20th century. And Dubuffet was born in Le Havre in 1901. And he was interested, he was born into a middle-class family. His father ran a wine distribution business. And Jean Dubuffet himself was interested in art. And eventually he goes to what was then, of course, the center of the art world, which is Paris. And he attaches himself to an art academy and studies painting. But he's quite unsettled and quite oppositional to the whole formal art world that he encounters in Paris. Uh, and within 6 months, he just leaves. He abandons the art academy and he goes back home, and basically he takes over his father's wine distribution business. So he leaves in 1918. He's there for 6 months and he goes back home and runs his father's business, which he does for about the next about 25 years or so. And while he's living in the Havre and while he's working and running his father's business, he becomes quite attached to the countryside as opposed to Paris, which is full of all these intellectual battles and intellectual dogmas and different sides to take on all these issues. And so he's immersed in the countryside, and he takes a great deal of solace and meaning within that kind of more quiet countryside living. And he becomes quite attached to the everyday people that he deals with in the countryside. And then around 1942, he returns to art once again, takes up painting once again, but he rejects all the intellectual approaches that were then dominant within the art world. And instead, what he does is he becomes quite fascinated with outsiders to the formal art world and the kind of art that they produce. In particular, he's fascinated by artwork that's being done by asylum inmates. He becomes quite fascinated with the simple, innocent work that's being done by children. And he also becomes quite fascinated with the materials of everyday life. He said, look at what lies at your feet. And he starts incorporating very granular and soil-based materials into his artwork, including sand and gravel and tar and straw. And he works these into his paintings, and he develops a style that becomes known as art brut, which is translated as outsider art. So this is his sense of differentiation from the formal high art world, and he embraces instead not only the art that's being done by people who are outsiders to the high art world, but he also begins incorporating materials that are materials of the earth. Now, he also becomes fascinated, as many artists did at the time, with the notions of the subconscious, and he begins incorporating and exploring themes of the subconscious in his artwork as well. And the piece that I'm sharing with you here is a piece that he did, kind of towards the end of his life from the 1960s on. And we'll look at that in a moment. But this notion about kind of looking at what lies, if you will, beneath the surface, on not only within one's consciousness, that is the subconscious, but also looking at those who are producing artwork that have been ignored by the official art world and incorporating materials that have been overlooked by the more formal artists, that is, incorporating the sand and the gravel and the tar, is all part of this theme about separating himself from the art establishment and finding something outside the art establishment, if you will. And so here's an article that was in Forbes magazine a couple of years ago. It has this lovely quote about him. Searching out the underground, what was what Dubuffet relished in. He loved uncovering what was beneath the surface. And so both materially, that is the sand, the gravel, the tar, the straw, but also, of course, in terms of the human being, kind of looking beyond the surface of human beings and going into the subconscious. So if you turn over the page, I have this quote from Dubuffet, in which he says, unless one says goodbye to what one loves, and unless one travels to completely new territories, one can expect merely a long wearing away of oneself and an eventual extinction. So here is this artist who has separated himself from the high art world of Paris and of the what was considered acceptable and what was considered to be the appropriate themes and materials and so forth. And he is informing us that you need to separate from all that because if you don't say goodbye to what you become attached to, then all you'll do will be have this long life that eventually leads to your own extinction. So let's look at this painting now. This painting, Comings and Goings, which I mentioned is done, I believe, in the early mid-60s, was also part of his attempt to portray what he understood to be happening within the mind. That there are these figures, these shapes that were constantly shaping and reshaping themselves, bumping into one another, flowing into one another, seeking some kind of discernment. And perhaps as we look upon them, we can try and ourselves discern what is happening here. Is this all just a bunch of images jumbling together, or is there something that is kind of seeking to be born and seeking to seek some kind of realization, some kind of formulation out of them? If you look at them, there are shapes there that have in them faces. There are shapes that have within them some eyes and mouths and nose and so forth that are kind of coming into, if you will, formulation, seeking perhaps an emergence. So, and he called this painting Comings and Goings. And Dubuffet said, the real function of art is to change mental patterns, making new thought possible. So as I thought about Dubuffet and what he was doing here, it got me to have a different perspective about what's happening within our Torah portion, which is this notion about separating from that which seemed inevitable, that which seems to be defining of all of reality, which is what empire, Pharaoh, the mighty serpent, what they all represent is this presumption that this is what reality is, this is what power is all about. And the Zohar is telling us that if you want to become something different than that, you can't just physically walk away from it because you've assimilated this reality within you. And certainly the main character of the story that we're dealing with, Moses, is very much that. Moses grew up in the palace. He grew up next to Pharaoh. He grew up as, if you will, a prince of Egypt. And so of all the characters, Moses represents that individual who now has to confront what it was he assimilated by living within the palace. It's not as if he can just walk out the doors and think he's a different person. He needs to engage in this kind of self-confrontation and transformation of self. And indeed, if he is going to be a leader of a movement of liberation, he needs to engage in that. He needs to model that. And the Israelites themselves need to go through some kind of purging of all the influence that they have absorbed about living within the empire. And so that reminds me that going back to our opening verse, where it says, come to Pharaoh. What the Zohar goes further to explain is what really the divine voice is saying is, come with me to Pharaoh, meaning that the voice is telling Moses, I understand this is a difficult thing for you to do, to confront that aspect of Pharaoh that has become assimilated within yourself, and that it's a fearsome thing to confront it. But don't worry, I'm going to be with you. So with that, this notion about the power of this Spirit of God that dwells within us will be our companion when it's necessary for us to confront that which we have to overcome, our own fears and anxieties that sometimes cause us to behave badly in the world, that Spirit is with us and will help us in our confrontation and self-transformation. With that, I'd love to call upon those who would like to comment. I'm going to call upon David Susan first, and then I'll call upon Rose. And Rose, when I call upon you, you wrote me a lovely email the other day. I hope you'll remark on some of the things that you said in there. So let me call upon David and Susan first. Go ahead, and then we'll get to Norm as well.
I just have a question, which is, am I clear that Bo, come, is understood by the Zohar as God being located at Pharaoh and saying, come to me, God, or come to where I am, when he says, come to Pharaoh? Or am I'm
No, that's good. In a sense, it's trying to overcome maybe that sense of bifurcation, that sense of that frightening power that has the capacity to destroy the world. I know that I like that you picked up on that, David. There's something confounding about that as well, and that gets to that radical notion about the lack of binariness to, if you will, good and evil that sometimes gets played out in Jewish spiritual texts. So thank you for that. Do you want to say some more about that and what you think about that?
Well, Susan had a word, had
Good,
advice.
good. Thank you. Go ahead, Susan.
So I'm struck by the parallelism, although in reverse, between Joseph and Moses, where Joseph leaves his people, he comes to Egypt, he learns how to assimilate, he learns the ways of Egypt, and then Moses flees, is raised in the palace, flees Egypt, and then comes back and has to learn how to give up what he had in Egypt and to be a guide for his people to grow from that.
I love that. And what you kind of pointed out is both Moses and Joseph are kind of princes of Egypt, right? Uh, and there is this notion in which they each go through this phase of being unrecognized. They're unrecognized Joseph is unrecognized by his brothers, his level of transformation. And if I can just anticipate something that Rose might bring in, but Rose, in her email, mentions that there's a way in which both Joseph eventually becomes unrecognized, unremembered by Pharaoh, and it seems as if perhaps Moses himself is now not recognized, is not remembered by Pharaoh. So that the relationship between Moses and Joseph as these characters and some of the dynamics that are happening there I think are right on the mark and kind of interesting to pursue. Susan, do you want to say some more? Or otherwise,
They're both princes, but they and they both were kind of aware of God too. They had a relationship with God that manifested itself in a way. I mean, Joseph said, I don't interpret dreams, God interprets dreams, you know. So it's just interesting that it was almost the reverse though.
nice, nice. I love that. Thank you.
Diving into the pool of assimilation and emerging back out of it.
Yeah, yeah. When right, to assimilate this power and then to somehow, as you just said, David, to like emerge out of that or purge oneself of it.
I kind of see some of that in the painting that you chose too.
Oh, tell us about that. How do you see that?
Well, apparently you said that his path was he went into art and then he came back out of art and he worked in his father's wine business, I think he said.
Right.
And then he went back into art looking for the simplistic. And I just kind of see that in this painting that where everything's morphing and changing and merging and combining.
It's very dynamic. What the canvas is very dynamic. Uh, the way you described it, that there are things in formation and shifting and merging and emerging. Yeah. So thank you for bringing us back to the canvas. Let me call upon Rose and then Norm, Robert, and Richard here. Yeah, Rose.
Okay, I'll make it fast because I have a couple points that I saw in the text that kind of I want to. I'm interested in what other people think of it. But to your point, Rabbi, I in my email I said well the one that I sent about Yosef in Genesis, that he was hidden, and Moshe. Um, it's kind of interesting because when he kills the Egyptian, it's, it sounds like, he's identifying with Bnei Israel, but it sounds like at that time he was very much an Egyptian, and that's how he's identified when he flees and Yitzro's daughters find him. They say, "This is the Egyptian that helped us at the well." So clearly he was all Egyptian. And, and that may be why Pharaoh doesn't recognize him is because he is no longer an Egyptian. He has made that transition back to being Jewish. And it's interesting, because both Yosef, as Susan said, both Yosef and Moshe have had to live in these two worlds of being Egyptians and being, Jewish. So right now we're really getting into the questions of identity and what's going to happen because between Bereshit and Shemot, we're making that transition from this tribe, this family saga, into peoplehood, into being a political force, and learning to deal among the other nations, learning how to be a political military force as well as a spiritual force. So that's pretty interesting. But I had two things that I noticed, and they're both in chapter 12. The first is verse 32, and Pharaoh says, get the hell out of here. But then he says, but bless me. Like, I'm not sure how that you can connote that, because he's saying, get out of here, you know, just go away, but bless me. Then in verse 42, it says, all the Tzvaot, the hosts of God left. Like the Jews were there for 430 years, and then they got out, and all the hosts left. And it's kind of a throwaway thing like, so was the heavenly assembly hanging out in Egypt all this time? Were some of the heavenly assembly? What were they doing there? Were they giving feedback back to God? It's really, but it's like a throwaway thing, and nobody ever says anything about it. Like, what does this mean? That's it. I'm opening it up to the
Yeah,
floor. Rabbi, you can do that.
lovely. And then focusing on that expression from Pharaoh, bring a blessing upon me also. How the different ways one could read that, I think, are so interesting. So let me just leave it there for now. And then let me call upon Norm, Robert, and then Richard.
So Bo means so many things to different people. I see Moses saying to Pharaoh, we talked from a religious point of view. You're supposed to be the God of Egypt. And when you tell people to do something, they have to do it. Our God has told us to come and worship, and yet you would not let us do that. I tried to talk to you from a religious point of view. I tried to reason with you administratively. 3 days. We'll go and worship. We'll come back. What's 3 days? And then I spoke to you man to man. Honestly, told you what we wanted. And time and again, you said we could go, and then you reversed it. You're not an honest person. So why is it that now I'm going to be approaching you as Bo instead of Lech? Come to you? It's because now things are going to get personal. They're going to get real personal. And the way they're going to get personal is that all the things that Joseph brought to Egypt, we're going to take away now. The eighth plague was the locusts, and the locusts destroyed the food supply of Egypt. What was it that Joseph brought to Egypt, gave to Egypt? The food supply. And we're taking that away now, because after the locusts were gone, there was no vegetation whatsoever. The country lives on vegetation, and there's no more left. Joseph was the seer. He's the one who could see what Pharaoh's dreams meant. But now we're going to have the darkness. Nobody is going to see anything. When you can't see anything, you can't do anything. So we're taking away that vision that Joseph brought. And finally, Joseph brought life to the entire country, where everybody would have died off because of the 7 years of famine. And with the death of the firstborn, we're going to be taking away that life that Joseph brought.
Oh, no, that's so fascinating. There goes David applauding. Yeah, I agree. It's a very rich reading to see kind of this devolution of the life and the gifts that Joseph brought to Egypt in order that life could prosper once again, and then with an ignoring of a forgetting of a forgetting of Joseph and a forgetting of all those gifts has its consequences, which it's going to be the devolution back to an impoverished, death rampant and starving world. So that's a very rich reading. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. So let me call upon Robert and then Richard here.
Well, thank you again for a lovely evening. I want to go back to your very first comment, and that is some of us, while we may not have scars, we find that we're getting something extra, and that is our foreheads are getting bigger. I'm sorry, I just can't resist. So you're fortunate that's your only issue. You know, come to Pharaoh is very interesting. I was struck by that as well. I just labored thinking on it just for a moment or two. So Pharaoh was a king. King is a sign of kingship, which is an attribute of God, if you will. So I can imagine what was being said was come to the condition of your Lord. I am the only king. Have no fear. You are coming to him that speaks to you. The other thing that comes to my mind is this point that Rose brought up, a blessing. I hadn't thought of this before. You know, it's interesting questions and comments. They bring, you know, there's a group think. A lot of things come out of it. I understand that Moses had a presence. He's the interlocutor of God. He's speaking what God wishes him to speak. No one on the planet has his authority, his station, his power, his presence. Now, when you're with somebody who has that kind of presence, and that person is going to worship, you're awed by it. And it would be very easy to say, because the Pharaoh is awed by him, he realizes, whether he admits it or not, Moses is greater. And so he says like the rascals say, who have two faces. You know, they do this in Iran all the time to the Baha'is. They look with one face, especially in the early days of the faith. They cut them when they turn their backs. So it's like he's in awe. He can't help it. So, you know, I don't believe in answers that are right or wrong as such, but I always love questions that make us think, and then a whole variety of answers that you know, might lead us to a greater understanding. And so, anyhow, that's what I thought of.
Thank you. And Robert, reminding us again that Moses' primary role here is to be a voice. It also reminds us that Moses recognizes his heaviness of being that voice, and his own personal journey is to find that voice. And it's lovely the way the five books of Moses, if you will, ends up in Deuteronomy with all there is his voice. He kind of reaches that culmination, that self-realization. Let me call upon Richard here.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think this is a fascinating idea of, someone said, of taking, God is standing next to Pharaoh, and he says to Moses, come over here, come over here. And God demonstrates that his voice makes a difference to what Pharaoh does. He doesn't keep his promises very long, 3 days, he gives us 3 days, you know. But he cuts a deal. And the business of a political ascendancy versus a spiritual ascendancy is what we're after here. And it's hard to find where that border is and whether or not you can do both. But you said before that not Judaism, but the Israelites is not a group of people. It's a consciousness that's traveling up on this border between Canaan and Eastern Meds. And there's a way of trying to get that involved in the world. And don't be afraid of these of these tyrants. And this Haftorah portion really struck me because it's talking about what did I do with it here? Yes. Egypt is a handsome heifer, a gadfly from north is coming, The mercenaries too in her midst are like stall-fed calves. They too shall turn tail, flee as one and make no stand. Their day of disaster is upon them, the hour of their doom. And I can't help but apply this next to what it says in the New York Times today about the man who would be king in our and God is saying, listen, there's a way to talk to these people. There's a way to see this as part of you. And don't forget, we're not doing any leaven here. This is about not getting involved with your ego desires. This is not puffing yourself up. This is not engaging in politics or even diplomacy. It's about telling Pharaoh that I want you to do this, and I did all this stuff with your land and everything like that to just let you know that I'm God, that I'm the power here. And these people just want to come worship me. Doesn't that make sense to you? And then as I look at the Haftorah portion, at the very end, God is saying, have no fear, my servant Jacob, be not dismayed. I will deliver you from far away, your folk from their land of captivity, and Jacob shall have calm and quiet with no trouble to him, because he's been mentored by God in the conversation with the ego-reaching king, that you can get a deal out of these people if you just are quiet and you got something for it. But the last chapter of that's in our Haftorah, it says, but have no fear, my servant Jacob, for I am with you. I will make an end of all the nations among which I have banished you, and I will not make an end of you. I will not leave you unpunished, but I will chastise you in measure. And I think that's very much, this is Jeremiah, who's, going to put a new sign on our hearts so we'll never forget. And one of the things we're not going to forget is, wait a minute, there are times we're not engaged in the spirituality that Moses has God show him that can be done with these tyrants. There's something you can do with a tyrant, and but if you don't do it right, I'll punish you in measure. It's not going to be an easy time. You think it's easy for God?
So let me cohere this back together. Oh, June, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
Just a quick comment on what Rose brought up about Pharaoh asking to be blessed. It just reminds me of someone who says, I don't believe in God, but if there is a God, give me a blessing anyway. He's covering his bases, I think Pharaoh is at that point. He's not really sure if God is there and if God's powerful, but just in case he is, put a blessing in for me. That was my comment.
Great. So in a sense, it's either a cynical statement or it is a hedging one's bet statement. And so that's kind of how I like to cohere everything together, because when we read the text, it's very easy for us to imagine that this is a battle, if you will, between these two external forces, one representing good, the other representing bad, one representing oppression, the other representing freedom. When we see the classic movie, we see Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston, right? And we know that we're rooting for one and we're booing the other. And so what the Zohar brings in is a reminder that there's another level beyond the narrative that makes it seem as if what we're reading about are just external forces. And the Zohar is reminding us that the most important battle occurs within, and that battle within has to be fought in order to be at all effective in the outside world. Otherwise, we're merely replicating all the traumas and all the damage that we carry with us. So, if you will, Pharaoh represents this hegemonic power in the world at the time, that of of rampant egoism, of rampant materialism, of a willingness to hurt others for one's own sake. And the Zohar is telling us, as David hinted at, those forces all exist within us merely because we're living in a world where that way of life and that philosophy has been so supreme. And it's unavoidable for us to have assimilated any of those things. And so if we really want to go on this journey to freedom, of living a life of shalom, of wholeness, of integration, of fulfillment and peace, then we have to go into that place, or we have to come inside and be accompanied by the source of all life, who has this is the source of everything that happens, and says you need to confront and purge yourself and redeem what is worthy of this environment and bring it with you. You don't have to reject the desires that are there, but what you have to reject are how you express those desires. And so this is, I think, in a sense, what Dubuffet, our artist, is also saying. He's saying you need to, well, there's a saying that the heart flows in the ways to which we habituate ourselves. And the Talmud will say something similar. It'll say, the universe will help you achieve what your heart has decided it wants to achieve. And in a sense, that's what Pharaoh represents during the first several plagues, where Pharaoh chooses to be an oppressor. And eventually, by the last three plagues, the universe is saying, that's your choice. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you be that person because that's what you've chosen. So the heart flows in the ways to which we habituate ourselves. And Dubuffet seems to be saying, we need to unhabituate ourselves. We need to reject the kinds of high art that is so intellectually driven, that is so distenuated from the realities of a simple life. We need to rebuild ourselves from the ground up. We need to use the soil and the straw, and in order to rebuild ourselves, we need to break away from the intellectualism that has caused so much damage in the world. And so this is
Kelly said,
why he says, unless one says goodbye to what one loves, meaning what one has become attached to, and unless one travels to completely new territories, one can expect merely a long wearing away of oneself and an eventual extinction. So, Bo the Pharaoh, each of us is called upon to engage with that darkness that we have assimilated merely from living within the kind of world that we've lived in. And if we do that, then we can go on a journey, and it'll be on a journey that's not just by ourselves, and we're accompanied by the source of everything. But what the narrative tells us is that we're accompanied, as Rose put it, by a nation in formation. And perhaps that's what's happening in Dubufay's painting, comings and goings. There's a nation in formation there.
Could I
Rosie,
just add one thing, Rabbi? I'm sorry, I didn't
yes,
mean
go
to.
ahead.
Just a quote from that great philosopher Pogo. We have, and we all know it, we have met the enemy and they is us.
And fortunately, we've been given a rich spiritual tradition that not only reminds us of that, but also gives us a practice and a way of viewing ourselves and our purpose in this world that can help us overcome the enemy that's within us as well. And it can't really be done in isolation. It can really only be done within community. And I'm so grateful for all of you who have created this kind of community that allows me to keep going and confronting what I need to confront. God bless you all. Look forward to our next gathering.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.
Night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Be
Good
well.
night.
Thank you. Be well.
Susan, I like your Nordic vibe with his